So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Lance Hicks. Lance is an abolitionist social worker, organizer, and trauma therapist. Born and raised in Detroit, he is a psychiatrist, survivor, and peer clinician with deep roots in radical, queer, and trans youth organizing and youth-led racial justice work. Lance's work has always involved harm reduction, peer education, crisis care, and mutual aid. His past experiences has included collaborations and work with groups such as the Fireweed Collective, formerly the Icarus Project, Trans Lifeline, GLSEN, formerly Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, and Camp Trans. Locally, Lance has worked and volunteered for nonprofits such as Alternatives for Girls, Affirmations, Common Ground, and Ruth Ellis Center. Currently, he's the founding organizer with Detroit Peer Respite and the clinical director of Inner Justice Works, where he provides gender-affirming care, navigation, and trauma therapy. Let's give it up for Lance.
Thanks. I'm most comfortable sitting, if that's okay. Slightly nervous to be in this role, just totally transparent. It's been a minute since I spoke for a group, but I was really honored and grateful to be asked to talk today, and to have folks here that matter to me and folks I haven't gotten to meet yet, who I hope to meet over the day. So I feel like I'm in this role as kind of from a dual place, both as a provider and as a recipient of mental health care for long-term and significant mental health difficulties. Most of the things that I deal with personally are related to experiences of trauma and not necessarily purely organic experiences. But what I love to do as a therapist and as a provider of mental health care is work with people who have a similar struggle to myself, which is people who experience what sometimes gets called like therapy failure, or like you're kind of like falling through the system, therapy isn't really helping, or you've been through a bunch of providers, or maybe you haven't gone to providers by choice, you've been court mandated, or your family's forced you, or whatever, and you may not even want to be there or have a negative overall experience of what that thing that we call mental health care is and what that means. I really, really like working with folks who don't trust me for at least the first 6 months. I think mistrust is really healthy in therapy sometimes. And that's because as a client, like it took me a really long time to find a therapist that I could trust. I didn't feel like I had therapy that was helpful to me on a personal level until I was in school to become a therapist. And my first reaction to that was relief to have, of course, the help that I needed. My second reaction was like deep rage and grief, because why is it that it takes me going all the way to becoming a therapist in order to find somebody who actually not just is able to help me, but seems to actually want to help me? I really, that didn't feel good. And I am an organizer long before a therapist, and honestly spent a lot of my early organizing career, which began in high school, telling myself I never wanted to be a therapist because I felt like therapy was useless. I felt like therapy was about sitting in a room with somebody who didn't share any of your problems, trying to help you feel better about significant issues, and then your time was over and they would clock out and you would be stuck holding the bag. And that was really my experience in therapy. I didn't experience anything very helpful for the earliest part of my life, and I was in and out of hospitals quite a lot. I was misdiagnosed because the providers that I worked with primarily were serving low-income folks. They had high-volume caseloads, and I was dealing with some significant issues that didn't get caught, and as a result, I got misdiagnosed with some things I didn't have, and I ended up getting like 15 rounds of shock therapy for a condition that I didn't have. Along the way, I experienced getting fired from a job as a therapist because I chose to receive mental health care on a day when I couldn't work. And I disclosed that to my employer and was fired. I was told to come to work in that state to provide therapy. So that happened. And in another situation, I was actually hospitalized by an employer because I was having kind of like some low-level dissociative symptoms on a day that I wasn't working or seeing clients at home, at no risk to self or other, just struggling emotionally, and was coerced into a hospital stay that I didn't need to be in. And then afterwards, pressure to take significant time off work that wasn't clinically indicated by any of my providers. So I'm talking about these experiences to say that I think a lot of the messiness I experienced was because we have this idea in mental health care that there's supposed to be this separate wall between providers and clients, and that's actually, in my opinion, not true. I think that people that are able to mask and put on the provider role and say, I'm not like the clients, maybe more resourced in certain ways, but also I think that almost everyone who does this kind of work does it for personal reasons. And so I do think that the conversation today, I'm really hoping can center on infrastructure. Because when I look at my life as both a client and a provider of mental health care, infrastructure is what's missing to create the abolitionist approach that I think we all want and are fighting for. So what I mean by that is just like one of my constant mantras in my mind is mandated reporting is a trauma response. I really think most of the time that's true. I'm not saying that I have the answer to every situation single-handedly and that I can promise that there would never be a situation where I would feel stuck in that way, because I'm not that great myself. But what I do know about myself is as a trauma therapist, almost all of my clients are actively suicidal every single day of their lives. So if that was gonna scare me into putting them all in the hospital, I would never see people outpatient. And I think that a lot of times people end up taking away power and control and agency from people in distress because of the fear responses in our own bodies. We worry, what if something happens to them? We genuinely don't want anything to happen to them. Also, we're often worried about liability. We may be worried about the policy of the agency where we work, or the laws or licensure requirements of our various positions. Those things all matter and they are important. And also, I think that we are sort of falling into the same trap that we so often talk to our clients about when we fall into fear responses and react without slowing down and reflecting and taking time. And I also think that the more access and ability to do that tends to rest in people with more power and privilege. At this point in my life, I'm fortunate to have an independent license, and that is a new thing for me. But I started doing this work in high school, and I'm guessing that a lot of y'all did that too, if not younger. And so I think about all the things that are put in place for me as a professional that were not in place for me when I was doing almost the same work as a teenager. One of those things is that there is an infrastructure of support built in to help me. So outside of my clinical practice, one of the things I do is I'm a co-founding member of Detroit Peer Respite. And we are a non-clinical abolitionist, peer-run and peer-led place to stay during mental health crisis. So it's not providing clinical care, it's not treatment, it's not therapy, it's not psychiatry. It's essentially mutual aid for people that say, I want this higher level of support and I can opt into this program voluntarily. And knowing that no clinical services are provided, but it is a consent-based supportive space. And so within that space, one thing that we're trying to cultivate is this concept of consultation circles, which is where we meet monthly with other peer support workers. You can be a professional too, with abolitionist kind of values, but we really look for peers. Because as a therapist, when I'm working with a client that's dealing with something out of my training or new to me and I'm struggling to know how to support them, I have a supervisor I can ask. I have multiple groups I can go to that are clinically appropriate spaces where I can say, like, how can I best support this person? Where can you direct me? What should I be looking for? And I think that most people in this room who are not clinicians actually do a lot of the same work, but without that built-in support system behind us. So that's one thing that I think needs to happen. But I think another thing is expanding what we view as a valid way of looking at experiences. I know for myself, I've been labeled severe and persistently mentally ill and all of those things, and I don't really even subscribe to the framework of mental illness at this time in my life. I affirm other people who do. But understanding that people have lots of different ways of not only understanding these experiences, ways of coming to hold these experiences, and also ways of moving through them. I will say as a therapist that I profoundly disagree that therapy is this blanket solution for the problems facing our community. It's not. First of all, not everybody wants or needs or should have to go to therapy. And there are a lot of really valid healing modalities that are not based in this clinical model that we have that integrates into this medical system that may not feel comfortable for us all. At the same time, I do think that it's important for it to be accessible and equitable for those who want, need, and choose to pursue it. But thinking about how we integrate other things to the table. So in my clinical practice, I started off working with the folks that I was most passionate to work with, which quickly led to developing a practice that was mostly trans folks who are trauma survivors who have been through extreme things and may have also disabilities, addictions, and just folks who are not getting support. And what really shocked and hurt me when I started doing that with my practice is that a lot of my colleagues, including other trans clinicians like myself, critiqued what I was doing and said, the folks you're seeing are too high needs for private practice. And I bristled at that for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons was because as a person who came through the community mental health systems in Wayne County and Oakland County as a young person who was transgender, who experienced running away from home, who experienced abuse and neglect growing up, and all sorts of risk factors myself, I felt like they were saying is those people are too much work for you and the county is the only place equipped to kind of deal with them. And mind you, I worked for Ruth Ellis doing therapy, and I felt like there was good work being done there, and I believe there still is. So I'm not trying to poo-poo on that at all. And I think that we need those resources, and they need our support. And also, I felt offended at the idea that private practice was this sort of luxury for the high-functioning and middle or upper-class folks. And so the folks that I get to work with at this point are doing in our private practice pretty much the same thing that you see in community mental health. We are offering peer support, we're offering care navigation, case management. Last night, somebody texted me who does case management with somebody and was like, our client needs a session right now. And we all got on Zoom together. And it was like a community kind of feeling. And I feel like the way that we can kind of be creative like that in non-traditional settings is that we have to kind of stop looking at the models that are already in place within mental health systems and actually look at how are organizers handling these problems, how are like youth movement leaders handling these problems, how are people that have been doing mutual aid since before we were calling it mutual aid handling these problems. And I guess I wanted to just ask if there were any thoughts or reflections on what kind of, like, assuming that we are a group of people who have all in our own ways been and already done these work, whether you have a professional title to go with that or not, but just maybe it's been a friend that crashed on your couch during a tough time, or that person that you told them, look, I know you're going through a rough period, so you can call me this week if you have to. And like, what would have held you in your ability to do that. I guess that's something that I want us to hold in mind today. And I'm thinking about my own experiences with that as well. Because after I graduated with my MSW, even though I had had good therapy and I had become a therapist and I had this shiny new job as a therapist, I still hadn't actually received the full care that I needed to deal with the issues that I was holding on to. And as a result, my mental health continued to be a difficulty for me as I entered into practice. And where I felt like clinical supports were failing me, I filled in the gaps with mutual aid and abolitionist care. So in 2016, I developed a peer support pod, which is a model that Mia Mingus talks about and Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective promotes. And here in Detroit is really promoted a lot by Detroit Safety Team, which is a group that I've worked with for some time. And basically, it's a formalized network of informalized peers who come together and support you in different ways. And over time, I had tried to develop infrastructure for my peer support pod because I knew that the level of need I had was great, and I was asking a lot from them. So I started thinking about what I could do to resource them as they were resourcing me. So one thing that we did is we used the app WhatsApp, and we had 2 separate groups, one with me in it and one without me in it. And I asked them to do the one without me in it so that they could support each other if supporting me was stressful. And this was based off of basically having burnt folks out in the past and knowing that these things happen. And this is what it looks like when we're doing this work because it's in our heart, but there's no infrastructure to back us up. I will say that it didn't take that long for me to burn out more than one pod, and at this point, I don't even use pods because that's not the most effective model for me. And part of the reason why it's not is because I actually need the people who support me to have an infrastructure behind them at this time. And I think that when we talk about abolitionist networks and when people react to that proposition with skepticism, or they say that can't work, or that's not feasible, or you can't provide services at the level they would be needed, what they're really talking about is they're talking about infrastructure. And I think that they're kind of right at this moment. The reality is that people contact me now regularly because both I'm a therapist and associated with the peer respite organizing. And they'll say, oh, my friend needs services, my friend needs crisis care, what can you do? And the reality is most of the time, nothing. Because I have a full caseload, I can't take on new therapy clients, I'm not a crisis responder myself. Our program, even though it technically will be kind of rapid response once we're operational in that people will be able to be admitted rapidly, it's still going to be one person at a time for a 7-day stay and one person only, which means we're going to be saying no a lot more than we're saying yes. So that makes me feel sad because this work is really in my heart. I called together the first meeting to organize peer respite after a particularly bad hospital stay I experienced, where a number of my rights were violated, and I came out with a lot more trauma than I went in with. After that, we started meeting monthly, and I was really, really lucky and fortunate to have an amazing crew of folks who showed up day in and day out for almost 2 years now without ever being paid for any of it to help pull this off. And to me, that was what was actually stabilizing for me more than the therapy or anything else. It was seeing a demonstration of friends and community show up for no personal gain other than because they knew that this has to be made right. That was my kind of healing process and continues to be so. And so more so than any therapist or clinician, and at this point I've had some excellent ones, but my friends and community are really the reason that I feel like I'm here, and also the reason why I believe in this work. And I also think that as somebody who now has pretty advanced training in multiple modalities that are, all the rage right now, I've been trained in internal family systems. I have a monthly consultant in sensory motor, somatic psychotherapy, trained by Pat Ogden. I have all of these fancy credentials, but let me tell you, my friends are more important than any of that. And I think that when we professionalize this work, we lose the humanized part of it. I show up for my clients dressed like this. I don't dress up for anybody anymore because I am done hiding who I am for the rest of my life. But I'm really grateful that this conversation is happening because I know that just 5 or 10 years ago, I wanted there to be this conversation, and it didn't feel like it was going to happen. And it didn't even, I wasn't in a lot of rooms where people seemed to be prioritizing it. And it makes me feel just like so personally full that people think that this matters, because this is an issue that I think we have to stop viewing like mental health as a separate topic, because in my opinion, if you are struggling in a significant way, if you have any type of trauma, if you have unmet needs, or if you're just an isolated person, like, this is something that is relevant to all of us. And also, even if you yourself feel like you're not personally struggling that much, like, if you're in community, then you know someone who is. So viewing it as a collective problem, I think, is where we have to start. And I'm just really grateful to be in community today to talk about it with everybody.
So we're gonna, I am going to facilitate a couple questions here to Lance, and then we're gonna transition to our next activity. Oh yeah, here. You can pass the mic.
Thank you. My name is Eldina Goodspeed, and I have an organization called Steps to Life Incorporated. And thank you so much for your transparency. Thank you so much for the freedom that you have. I was a clinician for years and years and decades, and there was a person that I was serving who has transgender issues. He was, his parents sent him to conversion therapy when he was a teenager, and now he's in his 40s, and he is struggling, trying to gain that self-acceptance and be who he really is. And since I have left that field, he follows me wherever I go. And now I do substance use disorder, and he's so involved with drinking. He has a alcohol use disorder problem now, because there is an unbalance. There is no, he can't, he doesn't know what to do. He's confused. So what would you suggest? And could I possibly refer him to, I know you said you are full, but is there any way that he could connect with a Zoom or support network where he could feel comfortable talking about who he really is and what he wants to do? Because one day he's one way and the next day he's not, and he goes back and forth, and he needs to talk to someone on common ground.
Thank you for your confidence. I think, if you want to talk one-on-one, I will give you my phone number or email. And anybody else, if you have like a personal question, I would definitely give you my contact info and be happy to answer it and talk one-on-one. Yeah.
So Lance, I'm so appreciative of you being here. I've learned so much about you today, and I've been around you for many years. One of the things that you said that was really important to me is that the supporter needs supporters. And then I'm gonna say some of the supporters need support, and then those people need supporters. And like you said, you burned some people out. So key to me is to find your circles of support. And one of the keys to what you've been saying is that for me, that was really good, is know who you are, be authentic, keep trying to find answers, and look for people. And so the solutions and the information that you're giving me, and hopefully others today, is just invaluable. I'll be in touch.
I think there's a, oh, over there. I also see one. Let's go over here and then there.
Hi, my name's Chris. I work at the library, but I got involved in doing advocacy work because someone really important to me was not just failed by like therapeutic models and like the mental health care system, but like actively really severely traumatized by some of the same kind of things you talked about. Can you kind of expand on your thoughts as far as like how do you rebuild that trust with that community? Because as I've dug into it more, there's a really large, as far as I can tell, essentially invisible population of people that cannot access mental health services or community resources because they were actively traumatized by them before. So they cannot use them. How do you, what do you, yeah.
So, without going into too much detail, because I think that is something that a person could have ongoing consultation for, but I think just witnessing where they're at and being respectful of it. So, like, I think about somebody that I worked with in therapy several years ago who was a young boy who he was a black boy and he had been adopted by two wealthy white women who were lesbians, and he was actually very affirming of his mother's lesbian's identity and very comfortable with that. And he had been bullied for it a little bit, but it wasn't a major problem. But the thing was he had other traumas in his life, and he had had 55 interactions with police by the time I met him at age 13. He'd been expelled from 9 different schools. And a lot of those instances had involved people that had the same license as myself getting involved and introducing those points of contact to this young person. And so the first thing I said to his mother when she called to set up this session was, it's got to be his choice. I'm only going to see him if he agrees. And when we met for the first time at my office, instead of inviting him in, I came out to the parking lot with photos that I'd taken of the inside of my office in the building, and I asked him if he wanted to see the pictures to decide whether or not he felt like going inside. And then he wanted to go inside, and then the first thing we did is we played a game called Find All of the Ways You Can Escape This Building. So, seriously, but I mean, what it is it's like instead of resisting the fact that they're uncomfortable, like lean into it and celebrate it and make that important. But I do think that could be an ongoing consultative question.
So, Lance, I just want to say thank you. My name is Camille, and I am the executive director of the Color of Autism Foundation. And one of the things we're very passionate about is stopping the shock. So when you said that, that was just like, oh. And I don't really have a question. I just have some commentary. Again, I think that it's so important that people hear your story because there's a lot of queer people as well as transgender people who are neurodivergent. And I think a lot of you have fallen through the cracks because a lot of the people that are supposed to support them, they don't want to deal with that part. And it's also because a lot of people think as autism and neurodivergence as being linear. So you're supposed to be a certain way. So thank you, and please continue talking about the shock because I want it to end like yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, yes.
Okay, I'll quickly go. My name is Tangela Smith. I'm an advocate and therapist. I work at the University of Michigan, so I see a lot of privileged students. But what I've noticed is basically everything that you said, I wish I could bottle it up and show it to everybody. I will come talk to you about some personal consultation, but I'm grateful to know that there are other folks who are clinicians who are out there in the space saying the same things that I'm doing. And so I just want to thank you for your vulnerability and your trust and your honesty today.
Thank you.
Hola. I'm Jay. We know that. But I too don't really have too many questions. I just want to give you your roses while you're here. So I wanted to piggy off of one thing that you said early in. He does really like the fact of people who don't like him at first. I'm not gonna lie, by my second session with him, I did chin check him for a second because I really thought he was a white boy out here wearing locks and I just wasn't having it. So, but after we went through that or whatever for a little bit, it was cool. Everything was great. I can say I am one of his success stories in a sense because he does tackle things with a different approach. I went through a lot of that same thing, the conversion therapy crap. I came from the South. I've only been in Detroit 15 years, raised in fuck-ass North Carolina, where everything is completely right-winged as fuck, not going through. I came up trying to come out during the whole don't ask, don't tell era. This was well before Obama got in. I'm dealing with Junior Bush's crap. So, you know, to come from that and then even now be able to see not only just one of my peers in this line of service, you know what I'm saying, that you know, may not necessarily, look a little bit like me, but like outside of that, having another trans guy, that's a big thing for us, right? Being able to see us, and it's the same thing with, you know what I'm saying, black people wanting to see therapy. You want to be able to see another one of you to be able to say, okay, we can have some relatable conversations that are typically unspoken, right? Like a lot of things that I appreciate and enjoyed so much from him was that I had trauma from other therapists of wanting to center everything into my transition. Everything was, well, what if you didn't have these thoughts when you were a kid? Do you think things would have been different with your family? I grew up through foster care too because of that, but not because of my transition. Like I got abandoned at 8 years old. I didn't have nothing to do with my transition at all. You know what I'm saying? But at least with him it was like, okay, outside of that, what else do you got going on? And we were able to unpack a lot of shit that, you know what I'm saying, I had never spoken about in 20-something years. I'm 30-something now, almost pushing 40, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I can honestly say, he is your therapist's favorite therapist, low key. They just not talking about it.
All right, we'll take one couple more.
Thank you. I just had a question. You talked about infrastructure a lot. How do we, I guess like in our Western mind, we think of resources as money. How do we build infrastructure without money? Like, how do we build the infrastructure for mutual aid?
Yeah.
And these organizations to exist and not be impeded on, without that resource?
Yeah. I think that's something I could talk at length about. But briefly, I think my feeling is, first of all, I think in the work it's important for everybody who does this to know in and out, like your own personal limits, right? Because I think that and I often encourage people, like when we train Pure Respite, we started doing a worksheet that I thought was cute of like red, yellow, green light for your support task. So if it's a support task that you feel totally comfortable in and you have no difficulty holding that space, like maybe you're somebody who's really comfortable talking to somebody about their eating disorder. They are dealing with, bulimia, and you feel like I have no issues discussing that challenge with you. It's not going to trigger me. It's not distressing at all. That's a green thing. Yellow will be something where it's like, I'm a little outside my comfort zone, or I'm a little nervous or stressed, or I'm not sure I feel qualified, or maybe I'm just tired today, but I care about you, so I'm willing to show up. Maybe it's like this person's suicidal, and I'm kind of triggered by suicide because I've lost people, and I don't really feel comfortable being that person, but I will do it if I need to, and I'm okay making that decision. That makes it a yellow. And then your red is like, I cannot go there. So like, let's say somebody confides in you about an assault they experienced that's similar to something you've been through. And it's like setting off your own trauma and you just cannot do it, right? That might be a red support task for you. It's good for you to kind of get clarity for yourself about what you can and can't do, because the reality is all of us are already doing too much. We're already, all of us, doing too much. And so we have to think about what are the things that if I do them or I do them repeatedly or ongoingly, I'm going to become bitter. I'm going to become resentful. I'm going to stop liking my friends. I'm going to stop wanting to do this work. you know, because it's not that it's not in your heart and it's not that you don't care, but everybody has a limit. And so a lot of us feel like we're bad people for having limits, and that means that we ignore our limits, and that's when our communities have breakdown. That's when our pods fall apart. That's when we get mad about things that instead we should probably be sad about, if you know what I mean. And I don't think there is an answer to the question, how do we do it without money? Because I think we need money. I think we need money. But I also think part of the question is, how are we going to get money, and what are we willing to risk and to lose in service of the money that we need? Because taking money is almost always a compromise. And so what compromises are we willing to make? And not holding too much harsh judgment for ourselves or each other. I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of co-responder models, but I am a fan of everyone who has taken resources to be in this room today. Whether I love your approach or it's not my favorite, I love that you're putting yourself in this space and you're making this conversation part of your landscape. Like, we need each other more than we need to be right in this room. So.
Okay, we'll take one more question for transitioning.
Hello?
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to tack on to what Lauren was saying. And Lance, thank you very much. You said a lot of very important things. It's nice to hear you. But I asked that question too, and I think we are, to some extent,
Here.
we're doing it to some extent here, because I think the one thing we can do, and that can be done, is like Valerie Bonner said last night, the greatest resource is people. And when we come together in a place like this, and we're willing to work together instead of against each other, and instead of in competition for funding, which, yeah, lots of us do this for free or for very little, but for decades we have, right? And that's not going to stop tomorrow. And there's always compromises that do come with funding. So I think that when we gather and our numbers grow, now the problem is at the same time that our numbers growing, our numbers are decreasing too, because people are dying every day from the things that we're fighting against or fighting to change. And so it's a mixed bag, but I think that continuing to do things like this, where we're having open conversation, honest and direct conversation, I think that's going to only help, because at some point, if we can reach critical mass, which I guess, I'm sorry, don't mean to be cynical and jaded, but the recent national election would give me concern that a vast majority of voters would choose what was chosen tells me that maybe we can't meet critical mass. But as we continue to build a movement, I would hope that our people power, our numbers, the sheer number of people who are affected by these issues is overwhelming in our society. It's not a succinct answer, but this place, people ask me about coming back today. I said, this feels different. I called a friend from DHDC this morning and asked him to show up at some point today, and I said, it feels different. It feels different. It feels like something is happening, and I want to believe that. And there's an energy here that I think is hopeful.
Lance and everyone for this discussion. Almost got me a little worked up there, Pam. So yeah, if we want to take a couple deep breaths, shake it out, whatever you need to do right now, we would like to transition into our data walk.